Macho Maroon. My name is David Peterson, and this is the Art of Language Invention 10 years on. All right. Okay, so I appear to be streaming, which is good. I am going to mention this. While there is chat obviously going, because this is a live stream, I'm not looking at the chat at the moment. I have a bunch of things that I wanted to tell you about, and then I'm going to switch it and do chat and stuff. So if you have questions, either hold them to the end or prepare for me to try to go back and scroll for things like that. Anyway, so today is the actual 10-year anniversary of the Art of Language Invention. This would have been the very first copy I ever got. I mean, not this exact book, but this is the Advanced Uncorrected Proofs Not for Sale. That was the version before I fixed everything, and there were no more errors in the book forever afterward. Just kidding. Anyway, by the way, that's also something I'm going to want for those who are watching. If you have spotted any errors that you've come across, now is going to be a good time to let me know, because I am about to deliver another set of errors to my editor for another edition, which is actually going to be, I've learned, the 20th printing. Not too bad. Anyway, but to kind of go back to the very, very beginning, this was how everything started. So basically, nothing was happening at all. I was living my life. I was a language creator for Game of Thrones, for Defiance, and then suddenly, out of the middle of nowhere, on May 8th, 2013, I got this email. And this is, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically this is an email from Elda Roeder, who was the editorial director for Penguin Classics. So for those of you that have a degree in English like I did, that's kind of a really big deal, because Penguin Classics are like your bread and butter. There's Penguin Classics, there's Norton, really, and then there's everything else. So this was really, really exciting. But to give you a bit of background on this, Elda was in charge of Penguin Classics and was branching out to do nonfiction, like, modern nonfiction. And she thought this would be a cool project. Specifically, here, I'm going to read this part. Part of my interest is in a guide to everyday phrases provided in various invented languages with a substantial introduction on how one develops it. Or we were thinking of a short book about 100 pages on the process itself with examples of sample phrases. Wonder if we could use High Valyrian, Klingon, or Elvish. It's prohibitive due to copyright issues as well, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is where everything started. So I got this email completely out of the blue, out of nowhere, and it was like, my God, this is basically a dream come true, because this was something that I had thought of before. Here's, by the way, here's a photo of me with Elda. I think that was from New York Comic Con. What on earth is that is New York Comic Con. What an ugly, ugly tag. Oh, it's Walking Dead. It's Walking Dead. That's why. Anyway, yeah, this was actually an idea that Doug Ball and I had quite a while ago. And this is a mock-up. We started the phonology chapter, which was going to be chapter 2. And yeah, this is my mock-up of it, and we actually started this. Doug and I came up with the idea of writing a textbook for conlanging. We had the whole thing mapped out, exactly what chapters there would be, what would be in each chapter, and we started with the phonology section to write it because it felt like kind of the easiest place to start. And I mocked it up based on how I thought it should look. For those of you who have ever followed like Langtime Studio or anything else, you know that I'm very, very visual, and so I like to create things the way I think that they should look. So like when I'm writing up a grammar, I like to imagine that if you just printed it out and bound it, this is exactly the way it would look inside of a book. This helps me visualize and make sure I'm doing the right thing. Doug is not that type of thinker. Doug was doing things a different way. And in fact, I'm really embarrassed to admit why this project didn't move forward. It was because Doug was and is an expert user of LaTeX. Those of you within linguistics will know what LaTeX is. Those who are not in linguistics won't know. At first, it's L-A-T-E-X. You might have heard it pronounced latex. It is apparently literally supposed to be pronounced LaTeX because of reasons. And it is an expert markup tool that allows you to produce like PDFs and documents. Very well done. And so Doug was using LaTeX, and he actually has everything that we drafted for this chapter in LaTeX. I still have it. And that was great. And then I got LaTeX, and I was like, I tried to use it so that, because we were going to be, sharing, writing different sections and doing that, I could not make heads or tails out of it. It's LaTeX is supposed to be user unfriendly. It just produces good results. And in fact, a lot of serious linguists who do a lot of articles end up using LaTeX, and the kind of format that you've come to expect from PDFs is basically what the LaTeX spits out. Anyway, so yeah, we had tried to do this before. It didn't get off the ground, and so, but it was definitely something that I had thought of. This was in 2009. I want to say. I believe this was in 2009 that we did this. Doug, by the way, Doug Ball, if you don't know his name, he's the inventor of the Scare language. He won a Smiley Award for Scare. It's a really good language. And he is a linguist at Truman State University, my wife Jessie's alma mater, where he teaches a conlang class and has for many, many years. And I've gone and visited there. I gave a talk there, both in the conlang class and generally. Anyway, so yeah, that was what I was thinking about. We've got some noisy birds out there. Do you think anybody, can they hear the noisy birds? Oh, nice. It's actually one of my favorite birds. I always grew up loving the sounds of crows. I thought it was delightful. Anyway, but back to the Art of Language Invention. So I kind of negotiated a little bit over email with Elda, not really knowing anything about anything. At this point, I was already negotiating my own contracts for TV shows and such, so I was familiar with that. I was also familiar with the kind of tricks that studios pull. But Elda sent me a contract from Penguin. It was gorgeous. Like, it was the type of thing. It wasn't even on white. It was on like slightly off-white. It was full color. It had a border. It had the little Penguin logo. It was gorgeous. It was long, and I didn't understand any of it at all. Any of it. Okay, that brings us to, this is Lee Bardugo, and this is she and I at the release of Siege and Storm. Wait. Yeah, Siege and Storm, because that was the second book. It was Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm, Ruin and Rising. Because it was the ship book. Anyway, so I met Lee Bardugo in 2011 at the World Science Fiction Convention in Reno. It was called Renovation. And I was doing a presentation on Dothraki. And as a part of my presentation, I had put up some phrases for people to pronounce. And I called on random people in the audience to pronounce these phrases. And I had done like 4 or 5 of these, so I called upon 4 or 5 different people, and I had set it up so that like the first ones were going to be short and easy, and then the last one was going to be super, super long. Anyway, it just so happened that for the last one, Lee raised her hand, and I called on her, and she did the pronunciation, which she did her best shot at. It was good. Anyway, for all of those people, I made words in Dothraki based on their name. And Lee introduced herself to me afterwards, saying that she was coming out with a new book that fall, and later asked if I could help her by putting up some pronunciations for the names and words in her book on her website that she was going to launch when her book came out. And so I did. Then, of course, Shadow and Bone became very popular. And Lee became super famous, but we remained friends ever since. So when I got this contract, my first thought was, well, I don't know what the heck this thing is. Um, why don't I just ask Lee about it? So I emailed Lee and asked her, like, can you take a look at this contract and just, all I want to know is, like, are there any gotchas in there? Are there any really, really big red flags that I need to be worried about? And Lee said to me, well, I could, but truth be told, I don't really do this. I have an agent who does this for me. Can I introduce you to my agent? And so she did. And that was Joanna Volpe from New Leaf. And from there on out, Joanna Volpe became my agent. She was my agent for the book, helped me manage the contract and what came afterwards. And now she is not just my agent, but also our agent, me and Jesse. She was also the one that came up with the idea for hiring an assistant for Motherland Fort Salem, which was the project that Jesse and I first worked on together. So Lee was just a huge help for this. And she also gave the book a blurb, which you will have seen if you've seen the book. Anyway, I also wanted to share this. This is from, this is from the Siege and Storm event. Just in case you haven't seen this picture, in case I need some compromat. I love that. She had a photo booth with outfits, and I had fun with it. That was a good one. Because, that was the same event. See, because I'm wearing the same thing. Anyway, all right. By the way, I'm seeing what everybody else is seeing, so I'm not seeing previews for what comes next. So this is a little bit of a surprise for me as well. Let's see what's next. Right. Okay, so the next step after like we had done this, basically for moving forward, was Elda asked me to write a book proposal. Which is a cool thing. It makes a lot of sense, except that I was very confused. I was like, well, you proposed this book to me. Why do I have to write a book proposal? And she actually sent me a couple of other successful book proposals that, were in Penguin's, purview, so that I could look at them, and I, basically cribbed them. And a book proposal includes a whole bunch of things like, information about you, information about the book's competition, and, why you think it should do this, the layout and so on, the length, the deadline. And I was like, it was a very surreal experience for me, because it was like, well, do you just tell me what is my deadline? How long is it supposed to be? Like, otherwise, just do whatever. And this was actually the title of the book that I pitched. It was Authentic Language Creation. And it looked just like this, with a fancy little font for the A and the L and the C. That was what I pitched as the title of the book. But they said, of course, like, well, that won't work, because even as far back as that, this was 2013, they're very particular about book titles, not for creative reasons, but for SEO reasons. They want book titles to basically be a list of keywords that Amazon recognizes. And so that's why you get books like a book I did later, whose title is Create Your Own Secret Language, and then a subtitle. I didn't win that argument, but this one I eventually did, because the title that they wanted for this book was How to Invent a Language. Which, I get it. I didn't like it, but I get it. And in fact, the kind of acronym that I used for drafts early on was H2I. And so if you see very early drafts on my computer that say H2I, that's why. It was How to Invent a Language for quite a while. But this was the original layout, table of contents that I proposed. So introduction, right? And then part one sounds, whole bunch of stuff here, including, by the way, a different case study. I was going to do the sound of Dothraki versus the sound of High Valyrian. That was the plan. It was going to be a lot longer. In fact, everything was going to be a lot longer. Part two had all of this. You can see this is much simplified. Part three had this. Cultural considerations. Those were gone. Part four is pretty much the same. The postscript was going to be much more involved. Gosh, it's kind of a shame that that was left off. Even from Penguin's perspective, because a full section on naming languages would be ideal. In other words, you've just read how to do all this the long way, the big way. What if you need something smaller? That's what that section would have been. It essentially would have been a recapitulation of, oh gosh, help me, Langmaker, Jeffrey Henning's naming language essay, but, done in my own style and, blah, blah, blah. And then second, I really wanted to do an example of how to present a conlang. In other words, because conlangs are very, very big things. And it matters how you present it depending on your audience. And I wanted to talk about that. So it's a shame that was lost. Also, working with others. All of these things I feel like were either done better later or I could have said more about later. So I feel like a lot of what we can talk about in terms of presentation nowadays, a lot of stuff Jesse has done really cool stuff on. Things like the not conlang year, but the big Gram Bank. That was it. If you haven't heard of it, Jesse's put together a spreadsheet where you use Gram Bank features to kind of delineate your language. It was very similar, honestly, to an approach that was pioneered by Taliesin for her CALS website, the Conlang Atlas of Language Structures. Very cool. Also, working with others, I sure know a whole lot more about it now than I did then. And I was really excited about the defining success section. Because if you've ever seen the video on my YouTube channel called Bad Conlangs, that's kind of like a really, really, really short version of what I wanted to do with defining success. Because, and again, it's one of the things I really feel like is missing from the book. Because a conlang, it's a very big thing, it's a very personal thing, but it also has a lot of different goals. And I think that there are a lot of conlangers who sit down and create a language and expect it to be immediately as successful as Esperanto, and when it's not, they're defeated. And then at the same time, they also look at something like Klingon and say, success is defined by people wanting to learn and use this language, whereas goals often can be much more personal. And a success can be a translation you've done on your own. A success can be a grammar that you've released. For example, Yoni, I'm not going to remember. I'm not going to remember their last name, but from Iceland, creator of Siwa, just released a new language with a new grammar. And for them, producing a brand new grammar book that they hold in their hands, whether or not anybody else buys it, is something that feels like a success. And that, and honestly, I get that one. So yeah, it just depends. Anyway, I was really excited about writing that because I didn't want people to get to the end of the book and get the wrong impression that if you have not done X, Y, and Z, it means you haven't created a successful conlang. And that is something that I feel like is still really missing from the Art of Language Invention, which is a shame. Because you cannot let anybody else or external factors define success for you when you're creating something as big and as personal as a language. Anyway, then appendix, that's all still in there. But I do want to mention that for the index, I put the index stuff in there because, linguistic books have indexes. They always do. I didn't realize that I would have to pay for it. In other words, added on to, so let me talk about advances really quick. An advance is basically a loan that you don't have to pay back. Or no, it's a loan that you don't get in trouble if you don't pay back, all right? The publishing company loans you some money. If you never pay it back, that's fine. It's also a zero interest loan. A zero interest loan where if you never pay it back, it's fine. Every time you sell a book, a little bit of money goes to paying back that loan. For the index, they said well, I could write it up, but I'm I don't know your pagination, and that's the most important part of it. They said, well, we can do it in-house. It will cost $2,000. $2,000. Oh, but it needed an index, and whether or not I could do it on my own, I didn't feel like I had the time. And I just had no way of knowing if I was going to make mistakes. And so I just footed the bill and put an index in the book. I'm glad I did. It added to, the advance, essentially. But I'm glad I did. Anyway, so that was the original proposal. And then, what happened, right? So, oh, by the way, a part of this was that they wanted to include, languages that I had worked on. The languages that I had worked on professionally up to that point were these. Not as many as you might think. So there was Game of Thrones, which had Dothraki, High Valyrian, and Astapori Valyrian up to that point. Defiance, which had 3 languages up to that point. Erathian, Castathan, and Dojisnen. It didn't have Kaz yet. Thor: The Dark World, which I think that everybody recognizes as the most successful of the Thor movies, the most memorable of the Thor movies. And then Star-Crossed, the magnificent show on the CW. That was it. I hadn't even started working on Dominion yet on sci-fi. And then there was The Zonix Deceit, which was a book written by Nina Post, which is a really fun book, a really funny book. I recommend it, and it includes a conlang that I created, term that my sister told me about, that diegetic. It's a diegetic conlang. There we go. It's a conlang in universe. Anyway, this was all the professional work I had to draw from. I also had the languages that I'd done before, and so you see a little bit of them. Like you see Kamikawi in there because I was still happy with that one. But this was it. For each of these languages, aside from the language I did for the Zonix Deceit, which I had pre-approval to include in stuff, which was great. But of course, you get that when you're working with the author, right? I had to seek approval for each of the languages that were used in all of these shows. That is, I had to go to the networks and say, can I please use the language in the book? Do I have permission to do that? I don't believe that you should ever have to, but, I'm working with a publishing company. The publishing company says that I have to do this, and so I'm going to do it. I felt very, very, very fortunate that the CW, absolutely no problem. They gave me permission. I probably can't share this because it's a legal document, but for Thor: The Dark World, they sent me back a permission that was on Marvel letterhead and included some drawings of Marvel superheroes. It's lovely. Oh, it wasn't just like an email or a little form. NBC Universal gave me permission for all the Defiance languages, which was great. HBO was difficult for a very bizarre and specific reason. Because then there is this book, which you may have seen, Living Language Dothraki. Even though Living Language Dothraki came out first, it was proposed second. So I was contacted, I think, in June of 2013. Remember that the first email was May of 2013. June of 2013, I was contacted about doing Living Language Dothraki. On earth are you going to do this book and then this other book that uses the languages? They're going to be competing against each other. And I was like, first of all, isn't that our concern, not yours? But yeah, they were, because there was already some hemming and hawing about how to do the languages in the Art of Language Invention. This made them question whether they were going to release permission at all or to what project. Thankfully, something came along and saved the day. On July 1st, 2013, big announcement, Penguin and Random House were merging. So in other words, Penguin, which was doing the Art of Language Invention, and Random House, that had an imprint that was doing Living Language Dothraki, were now the same company. And this actually happened over the months while I was working on the Art of Language Invention and Living Language Dothraki. The emails all changed and the letterheads all changed. Everything changed. So basically we were able to go back to HBO and say, check it out. These companies are now the same company. They're not competing. Furthermore, both projects are excited about each other because they're essentially different projects. One is like, we are learning this language, Dothraki, and the other one, this is how to create languages in general. If anything, we feel like they're going to be supporting one another. Is this okay? And HBO said yes, provided that any language material from Game of Thrones was used 49% or less in the Art of Language Invention compared to other conlangs in the book. That was something I found odd. I would have thought it would have been the other way. It's like, well, we want to be sure that our languages are highlighted in this, but they wanted it 49% or less. And so if you've ever wondered, as you're going through the Art of Language Invention, why there are so many Defiance examples, that is the reason. I had to at least get it up to 50% to be sure that the Game of Thrones languages weren't overrepresented. This was also, by the way, why I scaled back the case study, the High Valyrian versus, because, had to. So that was why that happened. Also, with this whole process of getting permissions, I used a number of languages created by other conlangers. So Sylvia Sotomayor, her Kalen is in there, Karsten Becker's Ayeri, Trent Pearson did something very special for me. He did that work of art specifically for the Art of Language Invention, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I, of course, had to get all their permission as well. And so the prospect of having to get permission from the Tolkien estate or from Paramount, and I didn't work for either of these, was basically more trouble than it was worth. So that was why there's no Klingon and none of Tolkien's languages in the Art of Language Invention. Like, if this permission issue weren't a part of it, of course I would have included them, absolutely. But there was no way I was going to go through that after having to go through all the other stuff. So anyway, that basically cleared the way for things to move forward. Oh yeah, I put that little thing. Okay, right. So then I started drafting. Sorry, I'm just reminding myself as I go along. I started drafting, and it was going slow. Elda was extremely patient with me. I had showed her the introduction, which she signed up on, but basically there was a part where she said, hey, we need to see where things are at right now. This was early 2014, I think February 2014. And so I said, all right, well, I've got the introductory material done, and I have the first chapter done, the sounds chapter, and I'm going to send it to you. And she didn't actually even read the whole thing. It was more like a glance at it before she emailed me back, and then she emailed me back more feedback later. But basically, she sent me this email saying, I think perhaps generously the phonetics section feels too long. I believe it's about 57 pages right now. That was just chapter 1, not the introductory material. That was, 20, 30 pages. And bear in mind that the thing that she said in her very first email was, remember, she was hoping for about 100 pages of how to create a language. And this was paginated out 57 pages long. Specifically, 574 words for the rest of the entire book. That was chapters 2, 3, and 4, the postscript, and whatever else. So this was a moment. This was a moment for me because basically I was like, I have to cut out at least 20,000 words from this chapter. And then I need to radically reduce everything that I am doing moving forward, and then basically beg for more words, because I think it ends up finishing out at around 80,000. Anyway, so it was called How to Invent a Language at this time, but because if I think, yes, right, okay, now I see what I was doing. All right, okay. I should pull this up on my phone so I can at least see where I'm going. But whatever. All right, so it was still called How to Invent a Language at this time. What I said in my email back was like, all right, I'm going to have to cut stuff out. I get that. But I feel like it would be dishonest to call this book How to Invent a Language. In other words, if this book doesn't fulfill my ideal of telling you exactly everything you need to know to create a language from beginning to end, then I cannot call this book How to Invent a Language, because it would be a lie. It would be saying that if you do everything in the book and get to the end, then you will be able to do that thing. And I was like, that's not what this is. By the way, I believe they also wanted to say, how to create your own secret language for the other one. And I was like, nope, that was why there's no how in there. Anyway, so I went back and forth about what to do, figured out how I was going to move forward with writing the book. But then I was like, okay, if I can't call it that, what can I call it? I was having a discussion with one of my best friends at the time, and my ex-brother-in-law, Will McPherson. I was telling him about what was going on, what the problems were, and he was the one that recommended to me, why don't you use the end to talk a little bit about, some of your philosophy, why you do this, the art behind it, in addition to all of the nuts and bolts. And then you can call the book The Art of Language Invention. Because that doesn't promise anything. It doesn't say you're going to know exactly how to create a language at the end of this. It's just discussing it. And I was like, I think that's perfect. And so I emailed Elda. I said, this is my suggestion. She said that, everything has to be run through a whole bunch of other people. But they were all on board. And so that was how the book got its title. Anyway, so, okay, now it's me again. See, I knew it was coming. All right, so anyway, that is basically how we got to the point where I wrote the Art of Language Invention that looks like the Art of Language Invention. It looks like the book that you have now. But I was really sad that I had to cut down that phonetics section so dramatically, because I put a lot of work into it. And it was that much work, if not more, that was going to go into every section that came after that. And so because of that, in honor of the 10-year anniversary, I thought it would be fun to just go ahead and release that chapter. So if you go to this URL, daedalus.com/AOLI_earlydraft.pdf, this is going to give you this is going to give you the draft I sent Elda. So it's going to give you the introductory material, which is mostly the same, but you're also going to see the original phonetics chapter exactly as I had drafted it. It also means there's tons of errors in it, and also, by the way, I looked it up. Because I only have a PDF of it at this state. There's no page numbers, so sorry about that. Read it in preview or something. But anyway, if you were curious to see what it would have been, this is what it would have been. So now let's talk about the cover. So this is the very first image I was sent. And shout out to Colin Weber. Colin Weber designed it, because I had two immediate reactions. Number one, I loved the art direction. I loved the colors. I loved the design. I loved that. Now the things I didn't love. Number one, this is like a bizarre mix of IPA, Americanist transcription, made-up transcription, no transcription. I also didn't love my name being all in lowercase. I've never been a fan of that, which you can probably tell if you've seen me type email messages or text messages or Discord messages, tweets, whatever. So this was the first one that I was given, and I really, really liked it. And I gave some feedback about how it could be changed, and I also showed them exactly how it should be done in IPA based on my dialect. And because this was just a draft, this was just an idea, this is a mock-up, this wasn't a proposal, right? Anyway, Colin took that back and came back with two potential covers. Now, Eagle-eyed folks will notice that these are not actual Art of Language Invention covers because there is an F there for of. I asked for a number of changes because I was like, you know what, this is close. You know, it's like it's not exactly IPA, of course, but it's, you know, closer. It got rid of some of the things I was less happy about. Got a schwa in there. We have the actual like stress marks. And you know, for everybody else, you can see the actual title in regular English orthography is on there as well. So basically I said, obviously get rid of the stress mark on of. That shouldn't be there. And also please change the F to a V. And that was basically how we got the cover. Then, but obviously you see two covers here, blue on black and black on blue. And they asked me which one I liked. And I went back and forth. It was really hard because, of course, I loved the blue cover because that was the first one that I was sent in that little mock-up. But I was like, there is something that really, really strikes me about that black cover. Let's go with the black cover. And so that then was the very first cover of the Art of Language Invention, you know, changed slightly. And then, of course, it also says from the author of Living Language Dothraki on the bottom, which was fun. Anyway, then something happened. So, how to put this? All right, so we did all that with the back and forth with the cover. We settled on the black cover. I was really, really happy with it. And then, basically, there was there's exact terminology for this, but anyway, there was a sales meeting. Like there was a sales and marketing meeting within Penguin. And I'm pretty sure that was an internal thing where basically the Penguin, you know, editors and everybody, they say, here are the new books that we have, art department too. And like, you know, here's what we've got. And then the sales people come take a look at it, hear the pitches, and say, these are some changes we recommend. Like, you know, we're really excited about this book, but we don't think that that title is going to work with our demographic. We don't think that art direction is going to work, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so they had this meeting. They went back to Colin, and they were like, sales said that the cover just doesn't work. They say, like, it's not really going to grab the science fiction and fantasy fans. It's not really, like, it doesn't say anything about what's inside of it. It looks really dry. We need you to do something else because as, you know, with the design as it is, this just isn't going to work. We need something different. And so then Colin went back, took this feedback and produced two entirely different covers for the Art of Language Invention, which then Elda presented to me and said they were really excited about it. Sales was really excited about it. They were like, this is the direction we're going to go in. Just choose the one you like best. And these are those covers. So, a positive thing that I will mention is that you will see the exact IPA of the Art of Language Invention is now there on the bottom in the little yellow thing. And it sure is. And that was exactly as I wrote it too. If you're questioning some of my choices there, that is exactly how I wrote it because that is how I believed it should be transcribed. Except for maybe with the of, maybe there should be a schwa there instead of a caret. But I mean, look at the caret next to the V. That's so cool. But yeah, I had a number of issues with these covers. And I actually wrote to, because like, you know, they sent the new covers and Joe sent me a tentative email. And I can always tell when, Joe is my agent, I can always tell when she's being tentative. Where it's like, her opinion is like, oh my God, this is not right. But in case I'm happy about it, she doesn't want to say it right off the bat. And so this email was sent, and then Joe like BCCs me on it and says, we're not even near anything like that. She says to me, so what do we think? I was like, oh, I know what you think. I know what you think. And I looked at these, like, I was so happy with the covers. I was like, oh my God, I can't even with this. Like, I can't. And Joe's like, do you want me to go back, like myself, and say that, we'd prefer a different direction? And I said, could you? And she did. Elda came back and basically said, well, we hear that you don't like it, but blah, 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 blah. And sales is really, really, really excited about this. So we really think that we should go in this direction. And Joe basically said to me, like, I tried, but I think it's going to mean more coming from you. And so I said, all right, we're doing this. So then I sent an email back. I've pulled out some quotes from the email. I'm fine with the heraldic. Sorry. That is what I wrote. Heraldic. Fine with the heraldic idea and even the iconography. That doesn't change the fact that this looks like the cover of a children's book. I'm thinking the imaginary adventures of Little Oshkosh in Wacky Land. Fans specifically of Game of Thrones will not take this seriously at all. I see fans of Game of Thrones picking this book up, knowing it's associated with me, and not buying it because of the cover. The crossed brush and pen are great, but where did they go? We only see the tops of them. I suppose they're not very long, but it looks a little odd compared to how the crossed swords usually sit behind a shield. This, by the way, is what I'm talking about. Where do the ends go? I don't know. Little Cthulhu is wretchedly adorable. He and the robot, though, are what cement this as the cover of a book for a 5-year-old. I would expect to open this book and find activities like a word search, a maze, coloring book pages, etc. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if with this cover there were parents who bought the book for their 4- and 5-year-olds only to be disappointed that there are no word jumbles. These guys need a redesign or they need to go. I mean, that robot face is a children's toy. It's just missing the earmuffs. And I found this image online and sent it to them attached to this email. That is an actual toy from way back when. And indeed, it looks like they took the he took the earmuffs and just made it a little antenna on top of his head. Oh, I guess also his teeth go horizontally instead of vertically. Slight differences. Anyway, so, yeah, I sent that. I also mentioned other things, like I didn't like the font. I called it the Bob the Builder font. And thankfully, I was able to sway them. And so then this was the final cover of the Art of Language Invention. And we included from the author of Living Language Dothraki on the bottom it was kind of like for HBO as well, so that there was some cross promotion. Also, the book came out first, and so it was like, now we could say, oh, this isn't just some new author. This author actually has a title under their belt. For those of you who have gotten the most recent edition, you'll note that it no longer says that. It's because Living Language is no longer a company, unfortunately. So they just quietly retired that element of the cover. Anyway, but I was very happy with that. That one was a victory. And not only that, it doesn't end there, because the next year, this was in January 27th, 2016, this cover of the Art of Language Invention won Colin Weber an award, specifically a certificate of typographic excellence. Because of the entire cover, he got an award that he could add to his portfolio. And I say, well done. Anyway, so that was a nice bit of vindication. All right, so there's one other thing I want to mention about drafting, because I feel like this was really important, and honestly, I was really proud of this. In fact, I'm really proud of this piece of writing, and it was only done in an internal email, so I wanted to share it. I was finished with the Art of Language Invention. I sent it off, and so now it was the stage of, all right, it's just editing, editing some things for content, editing, for length and blah, 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 like the really nuts and bolts stuff. They sent me over a whole bunch of corrections. One of the things they said, by the way, we changed every instance of they when it was a singular to he or she. And I was not happy about that. And so I sent back this email, or this was part of a longer email, but this is the section I sent, and I am just going to read it out. All right. So I said this. As a linguist and native English speaker, I have rolled my eyes at, but nevertheless accepted many of the stylistic changes suggested in this copy-edited manuscript. With my linguist hat on, though, there is simply no non-stylistic difference between each other and one another, and I stand by that. God, oh, that was so frustrating. Anyway, one I feel I should fight for, though, is the inclusion of singular they. Where possible, it's certainly acceptable to use plural nouns to license plural they, but aside from that, using either he or she or alternating pronouns is simply not an acceptable solution for the simple reason that he or she is not inclusive. He or she refers only to those who accept he or she as a personal pronoun, and there are many who do not. To the extent that we accept that there are those who would be put out by being referred to as either he or she, and I believe we must accept it, using he or she or alternating between he and she every other paragraph excludes those individuals, and that's something I don't wish to do, especially as a simple, acceptable, and inclusive solution exists. With my linguist's hat on, there is no possible argument opposing singular they that I would accept. Singular they is not new. It is at least 500 years old. So there can be no claim that it is a modern innovation. It is not. If it's tradition, then it's a privileged tradition and one that does not have its root in linguistic fact, as is the case with false rules like don't split an infinitive. It may sound off to some readers, but their numbers are dwindling. Before long, it will be the norm in writing, as it already is in speech. The use of plural pronouns in singular contexts is far from rare cross-linguistically. Using a plural second or third person pronoun is one of the most common ways to create an honorific or formal second person singular pronoun. In French, vous continues to be both a standard second person plural pronoun and a second person singular formal pronoun. It still takes second person plural agreement on the verb, but it's understood to be singular and it's accepted even in formal writing. The same phenomena is seen in Chichewa and countless other languages. We see a similar phenomenon in Spanish, where a third-person singular pronoun usted is used as a form of formal second-person singular address, despite the fact that it continues to take third-person singular agreement. These linguistic innovations are far from necessary. Each language mentioned has a standard method for making reference to singular entities of all persons, but language is not merely utilitarian. These strategies and others like them have arisen simply as a way of showing respect to the person one is addressing or referencing. In effect, that is precisely why singular they exists. It is disrespectful to refer to a human as it, another gender-neutral option, but it's also disrespectful to exclude any group when they ought not be excluded. As this is not only a book about language, but about the history of language and the very nuts and bolts that constitute a language, it seems like we have an opportunity to champion what should, in my mind, be a simple and uncontroversial shift, and I believe we should seize that opportunity. Thus, I would like to keep all my original instances of singular they. Where they can be avoided by the use of plural nouns, that's fine, but otherwise, I think most of the changes proposed are unnecessary. If this is impossible, I'd like the opportunity to rewrite each of the relevant sentences to try to avoid the use of a pronoun altogether. It will probably be difficult, but it's worth my time as I want this book to accurately reflect who I am as a person. All right. That is the email I sent. I was expecting a fight. Instead, what I got back was this. This is part of a larger email. Thanks for getting this all back to me so quickly and thoroughly, as well as for offering the most well-reasoned and clearly articulated, not to mention humanist, defense of overriding copy edits I've ever received. We'll retain the singular they. Anyway, I wanted to include that because sometimes you have to fight for things, but honestly, sometimes it's just, wow, well, that was pretty good. All right, let's do it. There wasn't like a back and forth. There was just me saying that, and then it was done. And so then, 10 years ago today, the book was published. And there it is, exactly as it was way, way, way back when. So, anyway, that was pretty cool. Obviously, the book came out on September 29th, 2015. And aside from some haters, I love this one. It's just an advertisement for my conlangs, darn it. It was an advertisement for Defiance, but it wasn't enough. By the way, oh yeah, you know what? An aside, I on this specifically, since I brought up Defiance, I wanted to mention this. My book came out. One of the people that gave it a blurb was the showrunner of Defiance, Kevin Murphy. But like when it came out, I said, "Hey, thank you so much for giving this a blurb. Can I send you a copy?" Kevin emailed me back and said, "Yeah, can you also send a copy to this guy?" He gave me his name and his address. And he said, and like when you write in it, like say, "Thank you so much for, green lighting Defiance and making it such an awesome, world building, event, sci-fi event and so on." This was basically the head of programming of Sci-Fi. And Defiance was on the chopping block. And Kevin was basically saying, like, in as many words, like, "Yeah, it's come to this. We're pulling out all the stops. We don't think we're going to get a season 4. And so we're trying everything, including this." And so I did. I sent him a copy of the book, talked about how grateful I was for being able to work on Defiance, how wonderful Defiance was, how cool it was for including so many created languages. It didn't work. Defiance didn't get a 4th season. And honestly, a lot of us are still really sad about that. Anyway, but I also got to record the audiobook. And this, by the way, is Bruce, the audio engineer that I worked with. That was a picture after we were done with the first one. And I got to work with him again for the new version. And that's a picture we took together after that. That was just last year. Anyway, because basically when it came to the audiobook, they're like, nobody's going to be able to do this. Like with all the different languages, nobody's going to be able to do this, so it has to be me. And so if you've never listened to the audiobook, I put a lot of love into that. And Bruce really helped out as well, because I'd never done anything like that before. He was super instrumental in helping me to do it. And he's also a language guy, so I was really happy to be working with him. So anyway, if you get a chance, the audiobook is good. And also the wildest thing that happened by far is that I was on the actual Daily Show on January 6th. Just crazy. This was set up by a publicist by the name of Andrea Lamb. I have no idea how they did it. Absolutely none. But basically it was like, because my daughter had just been born the month prior, December 4th. This was in December. And Andrea calls me and says, "I know that your daughter was just born and that you don't want to do anything, but what if it was the Daily Show?" I'm like, that's literally the only thing you could have said that could have gotten me to leave. And I did. And so that still remains kind of like presenting at TED as one of the most surreal and unbelievable things to happen in my life. Very weird. Also, Trevor Noah is cool. Anyway, also, 10 years ago today, this YouTube channel premiered. I launched it on the same day as the book was going to be published. And incidentally, my idea was all the stuff that I couldn't include in the Art of Language Invention the way I wanted to, I would do on the YouTube channel. And for the most part, I've done that. By the way, I've got videos planned, including the next one. I just haven't sat down and done it yet because we're doing a lot of prep for CopyCon. Oh, CopyCon, by the way, October 10th, University of Edinburgh. There are still some seats if you want to come. There are still some seats if you want to come. Anyway, but yeah, and I have to say one of the more surprising things to me was learning that people actually cared about this YouTube channel and watched it. Because really I had no idea, because at the time, right, think about, this is like 2015. Basically, this was the class of, YouTube conlanging. Look at how many subscribers Artifexian has. His videos have hundreds of thousands of views. And so I put mine out and it got like, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred views, and like, over time, maybe like 1,000. And it just kept on being that way. And so I was like, eventually I got busy and I stopped doing the videos. I honestly didn't think anybody would notice or miss it. And like, it turned out people actually watched them. I had no idea. I really had absolutely no idea. So I'm going to try to keep doing it, moving forward as best I can. By the way, like, I remember one of the very first comments on like the first video that I did, which was that one, by the way. So here, I'll bring this back for the image of it. Is like, somebody just like wrote, "LOL, wow, does your mommy not let you close your door?" It's like, wow, that's what I'm getting into. So yeah, I just yeah, so I was just like, whatever. But it was really endearing to find out that people actually cared about the channel. So yeah, I'll try my best to keep it up. Anyway, now it's me, and I don't remember why it's me, because I don't remember what I'm doing at this point. Oh, right. Okay, so like the book came out, yeah, and that was great. And people bought it. The thing that was actually the most surprising was that linguistics professors started adding it to their courses, not for language creation courses per se, but for introductory linguistics courses. That was, I think that was a surprise to all of us. It's like, wow, really? It also made sense. One of the comments that I've seen was that, there's not as much. There's like, the book is like a lot more Introduction to Linguistics light than Introduction to Conlang, and it's like, all right, fair, I get that. There should have been more pedagogical stuff in there, but it is what it is at this point, or at least at that point, with this cover, the black cover, that's what it was at that point. So now I want to tell you about what happened afterwards. So first, I had an idea. I was like, there's got to be a follow-up book to this. I wanted to do Living Language Valerian. That was axed. Some of you know that story. I'm not going to get into it. But I was like, well, what am I going to do for my next book? And so I had an idea. What if I went and did some deep dive interviews with some of the people I know who were really they were lifelong conlangers, serious conlangers, and talked to them about their process, about how they approach language creation. And then, of course, including examples of their languages and why they made certain choices. These were people that were on my first list. So Doug Ball, I mentioned, Sally Caves or Sarah Higley, professor up at University of Rochester. Jim Henry, who recently passed, and so that was really sad. Dennis Moskowitz, who created Rick Chick, and that is mentioned in the Art of Language Invention. Matt Pearson, creator of Okuna. John Quijada, creator of Ithquil. Sylvia Sotomayor, creator of Kalen. These were some of the people I was going to interview, and like each chapter was going to be about a person, and it was going to be a lot more narrative based, and I thought a lot more accessible. And I wanted to call this book The Joy of Language Invention, to go along with the Art of Language Invention. This unfortunately was shot down. Basically, what I was told is, and not so many words, was that in order to put out a book like this, you need to be so famous that everybody buys whatever you write. Otherwise, it's far too niche for a publisher to go for. So that one, unfortunately, had to go by the wayside, but I still think it's a good idea. And what they recommended was like, well, why don't you do a newsletter? And I was like, I was trying to find a project to do. Like, that was the whole point of this. Anyway, so that happened, but didn't go anywhere. Then on February 6, 2019, this happened. Get ready for this. All right, so I got an email from Cambridge University Press. I was asked to be a referee on a book, a new book from Cambridge University Press on language creation. And if you're wondering, well, what is Cambridge University Press? If you are in linguistics, you know them, even if you don't know you know them. They're the ones that do these books. The Red Books. Yeah, that series. This is like 3 different versions from the same series. Basically, they do this series of Red Books where it's just a very basic word about a topic in linguistics. And these things are essentially the authority right, for any subject you want, like even for linguists. I read the one on writing systems. It was outstanding. So basically, Cambridge was a really big deal. I didn't know if what they intended was for this to be a part of the Red Series. It wasn't, but they said, we have this proposal and we want you to review it. And so I took a look at it. I'm not going to say anything identifying about it, but in the book proposal, I was referred to. So basically it was like, because you have to talk about your competition. And the books that were referred to were the Art of Language Invention, the Language Construction Kit, and the Advanced Language Construction Kit. This jumped out to me, the sentence. These 3 books have in common that they are written from the perspective of language inventors. That is true. Mark and I are language inventors, and so we wrote a book on language invention. We wrote books on them. But this was held up as kind of like, well, these are from language inventors. We need one from a linguist. That was the central point. And about my book specifically, while the presentation of sounds and morphemes word construction is more comprehensive than that in Rosenfelder's, again, that's subjective, and the advice for conlangers more soundly based on professional language construction, this book overlooks most of syntactic structures needed in a real or invented language, such as questions, negation, or commands. Now, at this point in time, you know what the history of the Art of Language Invention was, and so you know, especially as I was heading into chapters 2, 3, and 4, these were all much, much, much reduced from what they were going to be. But nevertheless, these 3 things happen to be true. Anyway. Oh, right. Okay, so we'll come back to that. This was from the book proposal. There was also a sample chapter, and I pulled out this quote from this sample chapter. Invented languages can be of different types. The best known types are constructed languages, conlangs for short, and auxiliary languages, or auxlangs. The main difference between the two is whether they draw from existing languages or whether they are created entirely from scratch. If you are a language creator, you know that this is effectively gibberish. This was done before ChatGPT, but if it wasn't, I might have expected it to come from ChatGPT. Because invented language and constructed language are synonyms. And so to say that a conlang is a type of invented language is at least a bit of a head scratcher. Also, the main difference between those is not whether they draw from existing languages or not. That's completely orthogonal. There are auxlangs that draw from existing languages, whether conlangs or natural languages, and then there are those that don't. The same is true of non-auxlangs, and of course auxlang is a type of conlang, such as artlangs or whatever. Basically, this was complete mumbo-jumbo. And so I emailed them back and said, I cannot referee for this because first, I have a competing work, and second, it does not appear that this author has any understanding of what language creation is whatsoever. And I cannot endorse it in any way. So that happened. But there was something very useful in this. And so I go back to this sentence. It was pointed out that the Art of Language Invention lacked anything about questions, negation, or commands. This was true. And so what I did was I forwarded this email to my editor and said basically, remember how we had to cut a bunch of stuff out of the Art of Language Invention at first? Well, this is some of the stuff that was cut out. Now there's this book coming out saying that this is stuff that my book lacks, and they're going to have this. Can we please release a new edition that addresses this? And Elda said, yes. And so then the new version of the Art of Language Invention, right, it has 5 chapters, right? There were originally 4. Yeah. It's because, right. Because orthography became chapter 5, and then this was the new chapter 4. I was able to come out with a new edition of the Art of Language Invention, not just with corrections, that had an entirely new chapter that was called Phrases. And it featured a bunch of stuff, including that. But among them, questions, negation, and commands. The three specific things that the proposal said was missing from my book. They were now in there. So I was able to use this to basically put out a new and better version of the Art of Language Invention. And I'm honestly much, much happier with it now than I was when it first came out. It is still not the end-all be-all of learning everything about language invention, but it is much, much better than what it was. I was also able to include some more languages from other shows, like Tree Get a Slang from the 100. Some of you who aren't aware of the show or even the language, Tree Get a Slang, the community behind Tree Get a Slang is basically, they were my only fan group, like at all. And they have been devoted to this language for more than a decade now. And so I was so happy to be able to put some actual trig in the book. Also Shadow and Bone, which of course, what was really exciting because that Lee and I were friends. Now it was actually going to be made into a Netflix show. And so that was easy. They made sure I could use that in the book. Dune, very, very grateful that they gave us permission for that. We also changed the subtitle from Horse Lords to Dark Elves, the words behind world building, to From Horse Lords to Dark Elves to Sandworms, the words behind world building. And they signed off on that. They were good sports. Thank you. And even Motherland Fort Salem, which was Jesse and I's first project together. I also got to mention my daughter Meridian, who of course was born just a couple of months after the book came out. And I got to mention Jessie, my wife. And so all of that was in there, and so that was really, really cool. But one thing I didn't get to mention, I wanted to talk about this. I worked on this show called Emerald City, which was a reimagining of Oz. It ran for one season on NBC. Every single episode was directed by Tarsem Singh, which honestly, that recommends it enough. It also starred Arjuna, I believe, Arjuna, who is Jason Momoa's new wife. Anyway, so I created 2 languages for this show. I created a language for the witches, which is a really weird and wild language, not a naturalistic one for lore reasons. And also a naturalistic language for the Munchkins, or the Munchkins in this version of it, called Munja'kin, which was really cool. Really cool. It was like, what if I could do Kamakawi again? That was what Munja'kin is. And it's so, so cool. I love this. So for the new case study of for the Art of Language Invention, I wanted to do Munja'kin, specifically on negation. I was so excited. I loved this chapter. It's really short, but it's really, really good. Like, really good. I was so proud of this. And so then I went to ask for permission. Emerald City had been canceled by this point. First thing I did was I talked to the showrunner, because I didn't want to do it without his permission. That was David Schulner, who, by the way, at that time was the showrunner of New Amsterdam. And David Schulner and we got along. I liked him. I told him what I was doing, and he said, oh, absolutely. Like, I'd be so happy for that. But of course, he can't give me permission, but he did give me the name of the person that I needed to talk to at NBC to get permission. Did that, emailed them, said, hey, and I've got the permission of their showrunner. He says it's all good. All of that, NBC said no. They said no. No qualification. They're like, nope, can't use it. And I was like, first of all, I was bummed because it was really, really good. And it really illustrated what I wanted to illustrate. Second, because I had no other ideas. And third, because, like, how rude. I don't know. And, like, the show wasn't even going anymore. I was like, there was nothing at stake here. Oh, it was so frustrating. And I, went back and forth to get, like, so many permissions for the rest of the book. Anyway, they wouldn't allow it. And so I had to go somewhere else. But there was a silver lining. I was like, what's kind of similar is the negation strategy that we did for our very first language for Langtime Studio, Ingala, the language of the rabbits. And so that is why Ingala is used as the case study for the new version of the Art of Language Invention. But it's kind of cool that Langtime Studio got a mention, and I threw in a phrase book for it as well. So anyway, yeah, that happened. But like I said, just like the original version of my phonetics chapter, I was really, really proud. I was really proud of that study. So like, obviously, yeah, it's not going to be, published in a book or anything that I'm getting money for, but I am going to release it for free. So if you go to daedalus.com/AOLI_Munja'kin, no apostrophe because it's a URL, MUNJAKIN.PDF, you'll get to see that original case study. It's short, but I think it's so, so good. I love it. I love it. So anyway, what this also meant was that I remember way back when I got to decide between two different covers, the black or the blue. The blue one was the one I originally liked, but the black one, it kind of spoke to me. This meant I got to use the other one as well. And so then I got to see both of the covers that I fell in love with, and that became the new cover of the Art of Language Invention. But anyway, so as it stands now, the Art of Language Invention, right? What they originally wanted was a fun, light romp, highlighting some media conlangs in small amounts. That was kind of like the book they wanted. They wanted an Oprah book club version of language creation. What I wanted was the definitive guide on language creation. But I think now what we can say is that what the Art of Language Invention actually is, it's a pretty good and fun intro to linguistics and conlanging. I think that's it. But there's a part of me that still really, really wants to do this. Really wants to see this. And that's when we come to what happens next. So back to Cambridge, right? So they sent me this email. I saw the proposal and I was like, you know what? This means that they're in the market for something like this. And so what I said to Jesse, who was a professor at this time, you know what? I bet if you sent them a proposal, I bet it might go. And I gave her some advice on how to write it up. And she did. And then on the 23rd of this month was published the brand new book, How to Create a Language, the Conlang Guide from Cambridge University Press. And this is a definitive how to create a language guide. It may not be, yes, it may need to be like 1,000 pages to actually get into all the nuts and bolts. But if you really want to understand how to create a language, so not just read something that's super fun and has a bunch of examples, but actually goes through how to do this stuff, this is that book. I've read it. It is tremendous. Absolutely tremendous. One of the things that makes it so wonderful is that Jesse is really, really good at explaining things. Really good at explaining things. Much better than I am, in a very clear, easy to understand way for anybody. So if you want to sit down and figure out how to create a language, or if there's anything you're wondering, like you see the examples and like I talk about them and you say, but yeah, how do you do it? This is the book you go to. And it is on sale right now. We haven't seen it physically yet. Copies are flying. They haven't been delivered yet. We're very excited for it. But essentially, this is the book that I was hoping I could produce. And now you can have both. By the way, I love this cover, and so for those of you, you might see a little shout out to ALOI in there with my Kala glyph from Kamakawi up there in the cover. All right, so that is basically where we are at today. That was what I had to say. Aside from this, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Anybody who's ever bought this book, recommended it to a friend, gotten it as a gift, recommended it to a linguistics professor, recommended it to a library, checked it out from a library. Honestly, thank you so much. Because remember what I was telling you about advances, right? Because like if you don't ever make enough money with a book that you publish to actually earn out the advance, which is what that's called, then you just don't get any money from it. And I can tell you what that's like because I have a book like that, Create Your Own Secret Language. I don't think it's ever going to earn out its advance. The Art of Language Invention earned it out way early. And so now I actually do make money off of it. You know, not like a lot, but a little bit every so often. And it's because it actually did earn out the advance, which is totally wild. And honestly, it means a lot to me. So that was basically what I had to say. And thank you for listening to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do something I should have done earlier. I'm going to pull myself up on YouTube so that I can actually look at comments here.
So David.
Yes.
How did they assess the 49%? When they said you were limited to 49% in your first draft, was it by word count, character count? Like, how did they assess that?
Okay, so the question was about how to ensure that the Game of Thrones conlings were used less than 50% compared to the other conlings. And the truth is, it was, I think it was more of an honor thing, because I don't think I've ever counted, and I'm pretty sure they have never counted. I am pretty sure if somebody were to count that it would hold, like I hope. But I even tried to kind of stick to that with the new the new chapter as well. But especially if you take the Game of Thrones conlings versus all other conlings, period, I think it's well under 50%. And so I don't think that will be an issue. Oh, and Kara says that they can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and that question was from Zewe. Sorry if I mispronounced.
Zewe, yep.
Okay, and another question was sort of general, like, have you ever been reading something or looking at a grammar and just kind of screamed at the computer, wait, verbs can do that? And so I'm turning that into, what's the craziest thing you've seen a verb do?
Oh gosh, like, that's the thing. Like, I think that's happened to all of us. The only people that doesn't happen to are ones that don't look at language grammars, you know? I mean, you don't have to go far to find crazy things that languages do. In fact, if you go to, I gave a talk at Google up in Mountain View. I gave 2 of them, but this was the second one. And part of that, I included an example from Amharic. Pretty sure it was Amharic. It was either Amharic or Tigrinya. It's one of those. And like, I totally balked at this example. I looked at it, I was like, this is impossible. This not only is this impossible, this is ridiculous. There is no way that a language would do this. Because essentially, like, you have these verbs that are agreeing with prepositions, and they're trading out that looks like they're trading out geminate infixes. So you trade out the geminate infix to agree with a prepositional phrase elsewhere in the clause. Now, as it happens, probably 10 years later, I was talking to somebody who spoke this same language, and I was looking it up just for whatever reason, and then I went and I found that example. I was like, oh, I remember that, because it was like a double L versus a double B. I remember that example. Then I went and looked at it, and I was like, oh my God, I know exactly what this is doing, because I recognized it from Arabic, right, which is a related language. And I looked at it and I was like, I know exactly what this thing is doing. They're just repeating the adpositional phrase with an inherent pronoun, so it always looks the same, an inherent third-person singular pronoun, so it makes it look like an infix. And the consonant is just geminating to preserve the stress. And so it's like, it'd be the rough equivalent to, like, I to my sister talk to her, right? Talk to her squished together as a verb. And so now what it looks like it's agreeing with the prepositional phrase. And I was like, but I just looked at it, I was like, I know exactly why that happened. And you could only explain it because of the history. But otherwise, yeah, go back to that original talk. You'll see like how like I looked at that, I'm like, I've never seen this before in my life, and I can't explain it. And furthermore, I would have said it's impossible. And there it is. Yeah.
And also, when are we going to get a video on how to present conlangs? A lot of people have shown a lot of interest, and they have specifically requested a video in this series.
Oh, that's a really good idea. I don't know why I never thought of that. It's because I never thought of it, that's why.
Okay, I think that's everything.
No, that's a really good idea.
That I saw notes on that was asked while you were speaking. So now it's up to the live chatters.
Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and look at chat. I'll move my phone over so that, you know, it doesn't look like I'm looking off screen. Except
that Abby did request that you make a custom emoji of your Siege and Storm photo booth picture for Discord.
I'll do that. I've actually got another one that's pretty good too. I did a couple of photos in that series. Oh my gosh, you have no idea how appropriate this question is. How do you handle stress systems at a conlang so they stay natural and consistent while not sounding too without sounding too clunky in longer sentences? You've asked that at a really opportune time. So it is September 29th. 2 days from now will be October 1st. For those of you who are unfamiliar, we have a website called fiatlingua.org. It is a website from the Language Creation Society. And fiatlingua.org is a kind of conlang journal, except that the way it works is we only publish one thing a month on the first of every month. And it's just a PDF. So like there's not like peer review or there's not content filters or anything like that. The only thing is, because I'm the one deciding it, it's just they have to be conlang related. So there's all sorts of things. For example, one of my favorites is there was a lovely poem written in a conlang by Jim Henry for his daughter's wedding that he read out. And so he wrote it up, we put it up. But there are also like, you know, there's also master's theses on various conlangs, things like that. There are full grammars, whole bunch of stuff like that. I put up all the slides for my language creation course that I did at Berkeley in 2017. Massive download. Those are all up there. On October 1st of this month, Jesse Peterson, I should say. Jesse is releasing, or she's got the Fiat Lingua for October 1st next month, and it's going to be a guided, clickable PDF for how to design stress systems. If you've ever seen her Conlang Venture PDF, massive thing, 700 pages long. It's like a choose your own adventure for creating a language. This is kind of like that, but it's smaller and it's focused specifically on stress systems. So it asks questions like, from the start, like, how are we going to foot things? In other words, what's going to count as a foot in a conlang? Or is that something we're going to do? Is stress going to be on the right edge or the left edge? Is stress going to be sensitive to weight or not? And basically you just click through the links and she shows you what the results are. It's phenomenal. Honestly, it was one of the first things that Jessie ever showed me, because she designed it for her conlang class as a PowerPoint. And so it was an actual PowerPoint presentation. You open it up in PowerPoint and you followed along like that. Like you played it and you could follow the links. And I've always told her I thought this would be such a tremendous resource. But the problem is, since it's in PowerPoint, you kind of have to have PowerPoint in order for it to work. So she found a workaround and found a way to do it as a PDF. And so now it will be available. Oh my God, you know what? Something else. Jessie, like, question, is this live? Like, your book, the resources.
I don't know. I'll poke around and let you know. 'Cause there's also a new spreadsheet that I've created.
Yeah.
That has more features than just grammar.
Right. So if whether you buy Jessie's book or not, she's created to go along with the book a series of online resources that are freely available for everybody. And for some reason, with the excitement of the book coming out and everything else, we never thought to check, is the URL live and what is it? So look around for that. It should be linked to from the site, I would hope. You should be able to find it. I don't know. But yeah, we'll take a look. Oh, wait. Madam Knees. So, I know Artifexian's podcast ended, but does that mean Artifexian isn't doing the Christmas quiz anymore? The holiday quiz?
We need to ask.
We need to ask what?
We need to ask Artifexian.
Well, yeah. Man, because, I love doing that. And I especially love it because I won last time. But yeah, no, I'm totally down to do that for as long as he's willing to keep doing it. Anyway.
These online resources are not freely available.
What? They're not?
They're unlocked to validated instructors.
Oh. I don't know if everybody heard that, but apparently the online resources for Jesse's book are not freely available. They're only for instructors if you pay for it. It's a publisher thing. That's a shame because some of those things are really good. But anyway, all right. But yeah, so so anyway, so at this point, by the way, it's 3:27. I know we've been here for a bit. I put a 2-hour block on this, but we don't need to actually keep being here unless you want to hear me keep saying things. And so if you want to hear me keep saying things, just tell me things to say. If you're good, just I don't know. Just put a thumbs down in the chat or something.
No. No thumbs down.
Oh, of course it is 3:57 in India, where they're off by a half hour. But that's right. This was my earnest request, by the way, in case I don't know if anybody mentioned anything. But seriously, if you have found any other errors in the Art of Language Invention, please let me know. Depending on which edition you have, it might already have been corrected. But if not, Abby asks, any ideas for a third edition? Seriously, I'd have tons of ideas for a third edition, to add another chapter to the Art of Language Invention. But I really don't think this is going to become a Leaves of Grass. I think this is it. I think this is a very kind of, special and specific thing. I doubt we will be able to, I doubt I'll be putting out another one. Also though, Jesse is, Jesse's book, you'll see. Once you see Jesse's book, it's so good. It's so good. We don't need anything else from me, at least not from this. I think it's good as it is. Let's see. Ooh. So Madame Knees says, that's right. Big thank you to Jake, another person who helped out with just material from the book. Jake helped. I changed the Quechua example based on Jake's recommendations for the upcoming edition, or maybe the recent edition that just happened. But it was important because I needed to do the audio for the new chapter, which included pronouncing that. So Madame E says, I'm a software engineer who has conlang for years, where how would be a good way to offer my services for making those kinds of tools, like the stress PowerPoint for the conlang community. So, since you brought it up, I will talk about, Jesse and I have mentioned this several times, but I'm going to tell you what my ideal would be for a conlang suite. This has been attempted before, sometimes poorly, sometimes pretty well, but not just exactly right. this is what I would want for a conlang suite. So right now, I use Pages, which is the Mac equivalent of Word, because there's no better alternative. And because I really like to produce something that looks the way I want it to look. Not like, you produce this code and then when you hit compile, it's going to look like this. No, I like it to look the way that it's going to look. When I'm doing an HTML site, or when I was, back in the old days, it was constant refreshing. But there are a lot of things that a word processing document cannot do that a database approach could. So, for example, and I think Sylvia Sotomayor has created one of these with MySQL if you prefer, for Kalen that is great, but you have to be, it was specifically built by her for that language, so it's like you kind of have to do it anyway. Instead of writing up a document and filling it in, there are modules, and some of these modules will be, for example, an IPA chart that's modifiable. Where you say for this language, these columns are relevant, these rows are relevant, and put in these sounds. Bonus cherry on top, if when you selected those, it played a little in-baked audio file of this is how this sound is pronounced, for both vowels and consonants. Then there were, just text modules. So this would be for things for grammar, where you just write a bunch of text, but it expects you to have examples in there. So example sentences. Bonus if you could embed audio for those example sentences. And then as soon as you write up a section, it's tagged somewhere. Everything is tagged, so everything knows where everything else is, and they can talk to each other. Furthermore, it knows the conlang words that are used in your examples, and these things are pre-linked. So, for example, just pulling up your grammar document, you can say, show me every instance of the word for horse, and you're doing Dothraki, and so suddenly the word for horse shows up a whole bunch, right? All right, so that. And then in the dictionary section, there is one entry method. So there's a lexical entry. You decide exactly what the forms are going to be, what's going to take just what's going to be a box just for text entry, what's going to be a drop down. For example, part of speech would probably be a drop down, but you get to define that drop down, because for example, for Dothraki, there's a difference between animate and inanimate nouns. That distinction isn't present in tons of other languages. So I don't want to be pulling from a massive list that has everything relevant for every conlang I've ever done. I want to say for this language, I only want these things in the part of speech dropdown, right? And then you also say for each language, these are the things I want to be a part of a dictionary entry. So for some languages that we've done, the spelling that's used in the orthography is complex enough that we want a version with the font. And by the way, it should have font support for newly created fonts. We have a version in the font. Then after that, we have a version that says, this is what you have to type to get that thing in the font. Then there's the romanization and so on. And so you define which of those bubbles are going to be relevant for a lexical entry. So this language I'm creating doesn't actually have an orthography. It's spoken only. So those columns are not going to be present in the entry. This language is more isolating. It doesn't have a lot of inflection. So really it's just going to be a head word. In this language, though, there are principal parts, and I want to define what those principal parts are for nouns and for verbs and so on, and I want those to be listed in the dictionary entry. And then, of course, there's also the definition itself, and you can do two types of definitions. One, a longer definition, one, a smaller definition. And basically, it also keeps track of how many words you have. It could run stats and say, wow, you have this many words that end with this sound, this many words that begin with this sound. That would be great. Anyway, once you're done with an entry, you basically hit return and it's in the database. And then if you want, you'd be I want to see a dictionary. And so then what you say is show me a dictionary that does just, the language to English in full forms. And not only that, for this one, I don't want to see these columns. And so you unclick those, and it basically spits out something that's like a PDF or is PDFable that looks like a dictionary. Then it says you say, I want an English to Conlang version of the dictionary. So then you set that up. You use the short definition for the English words, and then like part of speech or something, and then the Conlang word after it, but none of the other stuff, because it's a short, simple dictionary. Okay? And so then basically you do the same thing with all the text sections, and you can put them all together and say, all right, now I want a document. Let's say, you know what? Let's say this is for a relay. So I know for this relay, these bits of grammar are going to be relevant. The rest aren't. So I don't want to send somebody the entire grammar. I want to send them these things. Also, these tables, like these grammatical tables, these will be relevant. The rest aren't. I want to send them these. And then, why the hell not? I'm just going to pull out specific lexical items to send them. Not the whole lexicon, just the ones that are relevant. And collect, tick all those boxes, and then PDF that. Anyway. And then, of course, cherry on top, there's also like Prot. There's a sound change applier like Lexergy. And there's even font creation software in there, even though I know that's like thousands of dollars. So that is the ideal Conlang suite. So far, there have been lots of things that have approached this. None of them have been, and of course, it should also be super user-friendly and super fast. Anyway, there are things that have approached this, and I've tried them out. Nothing has essentially done exactly what I wanted it to do. And so nothing has been good enough that I have been able to abandon my process, which is just using a Word document or a word processing document. I would dearly love for something to replace that process. Also, like you could have different languages in this, and so you might say like, how many times have I used this root form across all the languages I've ever created? And then it pulls it up. That would be so cool. Anyway.
Jake has a question when you're ready.
Right. So now, yeah, see, the people in the chat, they know what I'm talking about. It would be quite an undertaking, but it would be so good. It would be so good. Anyway. Because like, for example, right now, what we do? Like, we do keep track of the number of words that we've created. We do it by hand. So like every time we add a word, it's like, well, there's been a word that's added to like the case. Let's go increase that by 1. And I frequently notice that it's like, wait a minute, these don't match. Then you have to go back and recount and be like, oh yeah, I didn't enter these 2. And so you have to go and change it. Anyway, right. Oh, by the way, Langtime Studio, it's a thing that we do. It's a live stream that we do. We every Thursday at 2 p.m., Jesse and I are creating new languages for a board game that we're producing, and that's what we do every week. And we've been doing it for 5 years now. Wow. So yeah, if you're wondering like if I've been doing stuff on YouTube since this channel, yeah, it has been. Okay, so Jake, have you thought at all what you think things will be like in another 5 or 10 years? What would you like to see? That is actually a very good question. I'll tell you what I don't want to see. I don't want to see conlanging pushing into AI, because I have seen there are a few projects, not conlangs, but conlang software that I have seen that I won't mention because I don't want them to get any press, that are specifically like, hey, we've made this thing that you can buy that will make you a conlang. It uses Gen AI. That is the type of thing that is happening, and that is what I hope we don't see more of. It's basically, we're at one of those points where it's like, is the specific Gen AI that we see, is this something that is going to be long-lasting and going to expand and something that somebody's going to have to do something about and correct? Or is it something that's going to be a fad? And specifically, I'm thinking of NFTs. Remember NFTs? And like they were going to be the next thing, and it's like people were investing in them, and then like everything, they were finding a way to make everything in an NFT for a while. Like the NBA was, like every sport had a way that it was using NFTs to like somehow market it Like the NBA had like these special NFT player cards that you could buy, and there were different versions, and there was like a whole scheme. And then it pretty much died. It's not like NFTs aren't still around, but it's not really a thing. It didn't. It's not like everybody knows what they are anymore, and it didn't change the way we do everything. I hope that that's what's happening with specifically Gen AI, but I don't know. So that is something that sorry, I got distracted because I think that my parents just said that our game just arrived.
Oh, I'll look at that. You pay attention
Sorry,
to chat.
paying attention to chat. Yeah. All right. So anyway, but to talk about the positive stuff, if you've seen some of the things that I've written on Fiat Lingua, that is something that I would really like to see. It's funny because like a lot of the work that we do and a lot of what I enjoy doing is creating naturalistic languages. But the things that I tend to get most excited about are experimental. And I would like to see more of that. Like there's a conlang that was created as kind of a joke conlang that it's unpronounceable. Like I call it like K-bop, that one, and it's got a bunch of symbols on it. What a brilliant idea. It was this guy that just had videos of him doing things like putting on a hat, and he essentially treated them all like phonemes. And it's such like a goofy, wacky idea. Like that's the kind of stuff I enjoy seeing. Furthermore, it was like, that was a version of what you could do with that. It wasn't the version. You know what I mean? Like, because it actually kind of took the idea and it did it in a kind of a basic way. It was more like just replace phonemes with short videos and then line them up. But like you could do more stuff. It didn't have to just be that, like just a straight up line up the phonemes and just run them. Like you could do other stuff, and that would be really, really cool to see things like that. I love seeing really wild and wacky projects like that. And those are like, they're ones that are extremely technical. I would like to see ones that are more impressionistic. And this is what I talked about in the essay I wrote about surreal conlangs. Stuff that really plays with the idea of what meanings are we expressing. Because like the only one that I think that really had this as a goal was Toki Pona, where the goal was actually, we're not going to try to express ourselves specifically. And that's why it's been so funny seeing what's happened with Toki Pona since then, because it's been a bunch of people really excited about it and say, okay, how can we say this specifically? It's like, well, you just kind of defeated the whole real thought experiment. The idea was not how do you use a small set of words to express an entire set of specific meanings. It was like, what if these are your only concepts? And if you think about that question, then why don't you go even further in the other direction? Reduce the vocabulary even more. What types of things could you be saying if you had very, very little to say? There are some really interesting examples of this. There was, there's this movie I don't recommend. Okay, Short Circuit 2 or Short Circuit. You're going to see why, if you look this up, why this movie is not one that really should be remembered. But there's a scene in Short Circuit 2. There are two people trapped in a freezer, like an industrial freezer. For whatever reason, clearly for plot reasons, there is a telephone interface inside of this freezer. And so like the bad guys have locked them in there, but they're like, what can we do? They're like, well, there's a phone here. And they're like, doesn't this person, this other character in the movie, don't they have a car phone? Because they're trying to look for them because they know they've been kidnapped. And they're like, yeah. And they're like, okay, we can call them, but they can't talk to them. For whatever reason, they can't talk to them. All it can do is button presses. And so what they do is they use the button presses to tell them their location, because they know where they are. They know where they themselves are, using the touch tone to do songs. So like, for example, they're like, do, 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 do. It was like, oh, sitting by the dock of the bay. And so then it switches between them doing these things and the people in the car making turns to get to their location based on these songs that are beeped out on like a touchtone pad. And it's like, that's brilliant. It doesn't work because there are only 3 tones that are slightly modified on phones, so they actually can't do all of the songs that they did. For example, they do downtown, do 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 downtown, right? And it's like, no, that's too many notes. You didn't have that many notes on a real phone pad, but whatever. It works for the movie. That's the type of thing that I think is really, really interesting. It's like, what exactly are you saying if you have very, very little to say it with? And how might that be interesting? So yeah, I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. And there we go. Somebody put it in chat. It was K parentheses F parentheses bop parentheses T parentheses. I think I thought that F was an M because I was thinking of Bop by the Hanson brothers. Hanson, whatever. All right.
A little bit earlier, Sinowin had asked about creation of scripts for a conlang. How do you decide what to make the glyphs look like? Mine all end up looking too much like natural languages.
So in the Art of Language Invention, I do at least show you some things, but like it doesn't. The examples from my conlang don't go all the way back to the proto stage, which is what we like to do. But I just want to hold up this example. This is a natural language example, right? So starting with the head, right? That's just a picture, right? And that was after it was rotated 90 degrees. And then there's like a simplified version of it because, if you're actually going to be writing with it, it's going to get simplified, right? And then you have this cuneiform version. So like, and a lot of people have always misunderstood why that version exists, right? And it's because of the stylus. They were just using it to like literally punch like this, right? They weren't using it to draw. And so you will see a lot of, especially productions like TV shows and movies, they just become enchanted by cuneiform, and they're like, well, we need to create a new script, so let's create cuneiform. And they're like drawing all these little triangles. It's so ridiculous. Prometheus is an example, the Alien Universe movie. They're like, oh, we need something that's going to be like some old, ancient Ur language. Let's write it with freaking triangles because that's what cuneiform is. Anyway, so this is what I recommend. If you follow that process and really kind of like give yourself some hard guidelines, in other words, saying like, they're literally chiseling into stone at this point. And think about how would you render that if you had to do that a lot, the whole stone chiseling thing. And then you move to the next medium and say like, all right, the medium has changed a little bit. How would the glyphs change if you had to do that a lot, right? The result should hopefully be something that is unique to your system, that is just, that doesn't look like anything else. Or if it does look like something else, it's happenstance, And then finally, when you get to the end of it and you're actually doing like a font, remember that you are creating a font face. Any single writing system that you see, any font you see, that is a font face. It's not the same thing as a writing system. A writing system is theoretical. A font face is a specific instantiation of a writing system. This is why like you can open your fonts just for English and see like a million different A's. And I bet some of them, like, we have lots of interesting and cool and wacky fonts on our computer, right? Some of them are not going to look like each other. Some of them you're going to look at them and be like, how are these even the same letter? But we just kind of get used to it, And so when you're creating your actual font, you're just creating one font face of it, one version of it. It doesn't need to be the only version. And so don't worry about it necessarily. You can always do another one. There can be a blocky version, there can be a cursive version, there can be a serif version, there can be a non-serif version. I think that sometimes, not just conlangers, but also art departments fall into the trap of thinking like this writing system, this font face is the writing system and there's no other version. This is actually true of some of the handwritten stuff that I've seen in House of the Dragon where they're writing the serifs. I'm like, why are you doing that? They're writing them by hand. Nobody's going to do that. Nobody writes the serifs in English or Russian. Writing systems that are routinely presented with serifs, you know, that's a different font face for a different purpose, and you know. Anyway, so I'll tell you another. If this is, you know, if you trust somebody, something else that you can do is just create a brand new version of it, or you give to somebody else and say, hey, can you create a version of this? And I will give you a concrete example. For our very first season of Lang Time Studio, we created this language for the rabbit, Singala. And I did a writing system, and I really was not happy with it at the end of it. Not the system, I was unhappy with the font face. I didn't think it worked. That's actually why I didn't even bother to include it in the Art of Language Invention. It was done, but I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna put it in there. I'm not gonna put it in there. Also because it was supposed to be written from top to bottom, and I didn't even want to have to deal with that because it's not kerned. It's not kerned because it's supposed to be written from top to bottom. So then when you write it from left to right, the glyphs are like oddly spaced, you know. And like, if I was going to be presenting that in a book, I would want to kern it to make sure that all the things were spaced. It was just going to be a hassle, and so I didn't include it. But anyway, I was so unhappy with it that I actually went to two people that I trust. I went to Barry Garcia and Carl Buck. And I said, this is the writing system. I don't like it. Can you take this system and just show me like your own version of it? You know, like, what would you do if this was the system? Like, I'll tell you which, you know, little flourishes are important and which aren't. Like, what would you do if you had this on your own? And each of them gave me kind of a version of it, and I used both versions to kind of create a new version of the writing system. Also gave them credit on the font when I published it. You know, not that anybody ever looks at that information on the font, but it's in there. And you know, you can get really, really good results. And in fact, I wanted to get a tattoo done. The cat that I showed you in the presentation for my very first Art of Language Invention video, Kelly, she died last year. And she was one of my very best friends. And her name comes from Kamakawi. And so I had this tattoo done, which is Jesse's name in High Valyrian. And I thought, I want to do one on the other arm for Kelly, using her glyph in Kamakawi. But at the stage I've come to as a font maker, I still love the orthography of Kamakawi, but it's not quite there. It's not quite perfect. And in particular, the glyph for Kelly doesn't look very good. Like, I understand, like, it wasn't like a pictographic glyph. It was actually a combination glyph of the two syllables, K and Li, put together. And so it makes sense. But basically, I went to Barry Garcia and I said, this is what I want to do. This is what the glyph in Kamakawi looks like. I don't think it looks good. I explained to him exactly why the glyph looked like that, you know, the combination of the two characters, right? And so I said, like, it kind of has to look like that. And I certainly don't want to change it since, you know, that was the glyph that was there when Kelly was alive. But I was just wondering if you could do your own version of it, and I could use that as the basis of a tattoo. And he did, and I was absolutely ecstatic with the results. And then I got it tattooed right here. And so This is obviously kind of at an angle. I think I need to go like this. But it's really, really good. It's way better than the original, and it's something that I'm very, very happy with. And this, again, like this all happened because I took the writing system that I created and went to somebody else and said, can you kind of do your version of this? So if you're running into that problem, that could be something that you do. Again, you need to have somebody, that you trust and somebody whose style you like. But it can help with conlanging too. It can help to get a second set of eyes on something, just to kind of, just to see it from somebody else's perspective, just to see what they're seeing in it. It might not change what you want to do originally, but at least it will give you a fresh perspective, which is something that's always valuable. Anyway. All right. I don't know if I missed anything else. I'm totally not keeping up with chat, but
I think that was.
I think that was probably it.
Yeah.
Anyway, oh, by the way, something else. This is kind of random. The Art of Language Invention has been translated into Italian and Russian, and that's it. Living Language Dothraki has been translated into German, and that's it. I'm pretty sure. But I'm always excited for people to try to tackle it. It can be a challenge. I actually have a copy of the Russian version. I can't. My Russian was never good enough to be able to handle that, but I've glanced through it. I've never seen the Italian version. Maybe it hasn't been finished. I don't know. But anyway, but yeah, thank you very much for coming and listening. But like, moreover, just thank you for the past 10 years. I'm really, really grateful. I'm grateful for those that it has helped, and I hope, by the way, that the book is a positive thing. Just in your life and conlanging, I always wanted it to be a positive thing, not a negative thing to say you must do this way. I always wanted it to be a positive thing, because after all, we are just doing all this for fun. Even if you get paid, like, you wouldn't be doing this at all if it weren't fun, if you didn't enjoy it. And that's also true of the people, like even somebody like Mark Okrand, like, he didn't conlang before Klingon, right? But he kept up with it because he enjoys it. He did it again because he enjoys it. He likes it. It's something that's infectious. It's not necessarily for everybody, but for those for whom it's special, it really is special. And I definitely wouldn't want to take that away from anybody. So anyway, thank you so much. And new video coming probably after KopiCon. We got a lot to do in October. We got some big things ahead of us, but don't worry, I will keep doing it. So thanks, everybody. Stay grammar to the Langtime Studio crowd. And I'll see you soon.